The Three Pillars and the Four Pillars. To grasp Shinran's thought in Passages on the Pure Land Way, it is necessary to consider further his adaptation of the three pillars of Buddhism in structuring his work, especially in comparison with Teaching, Practice, and Realization. The full title of Teaching, Practice, and Realization is A Collection of Passages Revealing the True Teaching, Practice, and Realization of the Pure Land. In content, however, it is composed of 6 chapters, covering Teaching, Practice, Shinjin, Realization, the True Buddha and Land, and the Transformed Buddha and Land. In other words, within the true and real teaching, practice, and realization mentioned in the title, 6 topics are included. What concerns us here is the fact that the true teaching, practice, and realization have as their content the true teaching, practice, Shinjin, and realization, for the identical situation exists in the structure of Passages on the Pure Land Way. In the title, A Collection of Passages on the Pure Land Way, the terms teaching, practice, and realization are absent, but the opening prefatory passage contains words similar to the general preface of Teaching, Practice, and Realization. Quote, "Here I, Gutoku, reverently entrust myself to the teaching, practice, and realization that are the true essence of the Pure Land Way." Close quote. These words indicate that the Passages on the Pure Land Way, like Teaching, Practice, and Realization, takes, quote, "the teaching, practice, and realization of the true essence," close quote, "of the Pure Land Way as its subject." The body of Passages on the Pure Land Way, however, treats the 4 pillars of teaching, practice, Shinjin, and realization. Why did Shinran not, in fact, entitle his major work Kyogao Shinsho, reflecting its contents? In the case of Passages on the Pure Land Way, why did he not write, quote, "entrusting myself to the teaching, practice, Shinjin, and realization that are the true essence of the Pure Land Way"? Since in the preface to Teaching, Practice, and Realization he writes, quote, "solely devote yourself to this practice and revere only this Shinjin," close quote, there is no reason that a similar expression could not have been used. The concept of the 3 pillars of teaching, practice, and realization is fundamental to all Buddhism, and Shinran's teaching as a form of Buddhism, or rather as the single true and real path to attainment of enlightenment, namely the one vehicle, follows this pattern. The path to Buddhahood through the Nembutsu was first established by Honen in his Passages on the Nembutsu selected in the Primal Vow, and Shinran, in order to develop and clarify it further, wrote his major work, employing in the title the terms Kyogao Sho that express this fundamental and generally accepted Buddhist scheme. In this, he sought to emphasize not the distinctive characteristics of Shin Buddhism, but rather its generality, the fact that it is the one vehicle. In other words, in Teaching, Practice, and Realization, Shinran is not asserting a personal understanding, but the fact that the path of the Nembutsu is the only true path to enlightenment for people of the latter ages. Since the true and real teaching, practice, and realization are the central concerns of the work, he directly introduces them in the title. If this is so, why are the contents organized around the 4 pillars of teaching, practice, Shinjin, and realization? In other words, why is Shinjin, though not mentioned in the title, placed among the traditional 3 pillars? The answer is that the practice in the Pure Land Way differs from that in other Buddhist teachings because it is Amida's iko, and Shinran sought to clarify this in his work. In other forms of Buddhism, practice is performed by a person through his own capabilities and efforts. But in Shin Buddhism, a person receives it from Amida. In Shinran's words, the practices of other forms of Buddhism are, quote, practices of self-power. But the practice in Shin Buddhism is the, quote, practice that is directed to beings through other power, close quote. Shinran, in order to distinguish this practice directed by the Buddha from the acts performed in other forms of Buddhism, termed it great practice, which is explained as a person's utterance of Namu Amida Butsu. Quote, great practice is to say the name of the Tathagata of unhindered light. Close quote. But this simple human act cannot in itself bring about enlightenment, which is difficult even through the austere self-power practices. It has this power because it arises from Amida's vow. Thus, not all utterance of the Nembutsu is the cause of attaining Buddhahood. Saying the name becomes the cause of enlightenment the moment it becomes an act directed to the person by Amida through the power of the vow. That point in time is the point when Shinjin becomes settled. In a letter, Shinran states, quote, it is when one is grasped by Amida that the settling of Shinjin occurs. Close quote. The question of whether a person's utterance of the name possesses the nature of great practice, whether it is directed to the person through the power of the vow, turns on whether Shinjin is settled in that person. Thus, the fundamental nature that makes great practice what it is, that allows it to possess the power to bring about realization, must be said to lie in Shinjin. With practice in other forms of Buddhism, the power that the act itself possesses becomes the cause of realization. But with practice in Shin Buddhism, the power does not lie in simple utterance. Utterance becomes great practice through having Shinjin as its fundamental nature. Hence, in clarifying, quote, the teaching, practice, and realization that are the essence of the Pure Land Way, close quote, an explanation of the nature of practice necessarily becomes an explanation of Shinjin. As long as the practice referred to is great practice, the practice directed by the vow mind, that practice is at the same time Shinjin. Thus, in Passages on the Pure Land Way, Shinran introduces the concept of Iko within the section on practice and develops there both aspects of Iko for going forth, practice, and Shinjin. Moreover, the point of transition between practice and Shinjin is formed by Shinran's consideration of the term Naishi Isshin, which, in the scriptural passages he quotes, refers both to a single utterance of the name and to the moment of realizing Shinjin, quote, in which one attains the mind and the practice, that is, Shinjin and Nembutsu, that results in birth in the Pure Land, close quote. In Shinran's interpretation of Ichinen, which is the point in which saying the name becomes great practice through the realization of Shinjin, we find the essential unity of Nembutsu and Shinjin expressed. Quote, saying the name breaks through all the ignorance of sentient beings and fulfills all their aspirations. Saying the name is the right act, supreme, true, and excellent. The right act is the Nembutsu. The Nembutsu is Namu Amida Butsu. Namu Amida Butsu is right-mindedness. Close quote. This passage might be rendered schematically. Saying the name equals right act equals Nembutsu equals Namu Amida Butsu equals right-mindedness or Shinjin. Because of its importance, this scheme also appears in Passages on the Pure Land Way. Saying the name equals mindfulness or Shinjin equals Nembutsu equals Namu Amida Butsu. In Passages on the Pure Land Way, saying the name is immediately equated with mindfulness, and right-mindedness is omitted. As indicated by this scheme, in the practice of Shin Buddhism, saying the name, verbally, right-mindedness or mindfulness, which is mental, and Namu Amida Butsu, the name, are all essential and inseparable. Practice is also Shinjin. Namu Amida Butsu, the name, is also saying the name and Shinjin. Saying the name is the expression of Shinjin. Shinjin is the voiceless saying of the name. In Teaching, Practice, and Realization, Shinran considers Shinjin in a separate chapter after practice in order to reveal the importance of Shinjin to practice as the cause, leading to realization or result. It was not an attempt to put forth a personal understanding in contrast to Honen's teaching of birth through the Nembutsu, or to establish a teaching of birth through Shinjin. If we consider his inclusion of a separate chapter on Shinjin as an attempt to establish a new understanding of the Pure Land teaching, then it becomes impossible to explain the apparent inconsistency between the title and contents of Teaching, Practice, and Realization. Shinran presents his detailed treatment of Shinjin in Teaching, Practice, and Realization only in order to clarify precisely what it is that makes saying the name the cause that brings about realization.